Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence will come to order. Without objection, the subcommittee may recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing today is to evaluate the unprecedented uptick in organized retail crime in the United States and to hear testimony from key witnesses from federal government and private industry. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon. We welcome you to today's important hearing on organized retail crime and threats to our public safety. The topic of today's hearing is the issue of organized retail crime, which has been rising throughout the country, demonstrating a threat to tens of thousands of retailers of all sizes and subjecting employees and customers to real harm. As many Americans flock to stores to complete their holiday shopping this Christmas season, large organizations of professional shoplifters or boosters are exploiting soft-on-crime policies to ransack American businesses and carry out an unprecedented spike in retail crime. Generally, organized retail crime involves the association of two or more persons engaged in illegally obtaining merchandise of value from retail establishments through theft and/or fraud as part of a criminal enterprise. This is not the same thing as shoplifting or petty theft, both of which obviously are illegal. This type of organized activity involves multiple occurrences and may transpire across various stores and state jurisdictions, further complicating matters for which law enforcement agencies to combat these crimes. We also have reports that transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, that are taking advantage of our open borders are also engaging in retail theft. It's important to note that these criminals do not show any bias when selecting targets, and this crime occurs across a wide spectrum, from big cities to small towns in both urban and also rural areas. It has been said that organized retail crime is overblown. That's false. We cannot remain oblivious to the surge in organized retail crime throughout the country, impacting every one of our districts. As many of us have seen, retailers are not overhyping the threats or challenges posed by the criminal activity. They are taking steps to ensure the safety of their staff, customers, and products. This includes measures like placing common items like detergent and baby formula behind anti-theft plexiglass and utilizing smart shopping carts equipped with automatically locking wheels to prevent thieves from exiting the stores with the cart without paying. In Washington, D.C., where the Progressive City Council has implemented soft-on-crime legislation that has emboldened criminals to run rampant through the district, one CVS has resorted to displaying tissue paper and rolls of toilet paper as photographs, not the actual product, but as photographs to prevent theft. In situations like this, we must look at the immediate impact on families and consumers. This right here directly drives away a mother looking to buy diapers and formula at her neighborhood store, or a family looking to quickly grab over-the-counter medicine for their loved ones. These chaotic, calculated robberies not only pose a risk to employees, customers, and store owners, but there is a multifaceted domino effect on our communities, as well as the workload that occurs on law enforcement. The National Retail Federation, which will be participating in the second panel today, surveyed over 230 retail asset protection professionals and found that 90% indicated that organized retail crime is more of a risk to retail businesses now than it was just 3 years ago. Businesses of all size and all locations, from big box stores like Home Depot, Macy's, Gap, Walmart, Target, CVS, Walgreens, and many others, to mom and pop shops like Eggemeyer's General Store in my hometown of San Angelo, Texas, are all worried about these alarming trends and are sounding the alarm on the rise of criminal activity tied to them. In addition to widespread theft, some of these cases have turned deadly. Just last week, a security guard at a Macy's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was fatally stabbed by a man attempting to steal merchandise. A second security guard was also injured. According to reports, the suspect, who was later arrested, has a history of retail theft, of robbery, and drug offenses across the Philadelphia region. Moreover, at this Macy's location alone, they filed over 250 reports of retail theft in a year. Then, last year at a Home Depot in Hillsborough, North Carolina, an elderly employee of Home Depot, Gary Razor, was assaulted by a man attempting to steal power washers. According to reports, Mr. Razor, who was 82 years old, was violently shoved during the attempted theft and later died of his injuries. Sadly, these incidents are not isolated, and similar tragedies have occurred across the country. notwithstanding that violence tied to organized retail crime has resulted in damage to storefronts and other property, as we've seen on the news in many locations. Organized retail crime is also responsible for financial losses to retailers. As a result, they have begun closing stores in certain locations, which also creates a negative impact on those communities that they serve and kills jobs for thousands of Americans. According to a report by the Retail Industry Leaders Association on the impact of organized retail crime, nearly $70 billion worth of goods was stolen from American retailers in 2019. On a micro level, Walmart has stated that it loses nearly $3 billion per year in U.S. revenue due to theft. The severity of large-scale theft and other factors has led Walmart to close several stores and has a raising of prices effect nationwide. Reports also indicated that Walmart plans to open a police workspace within one of its Atlanta stores, a recent drastic measure aimed at mitigating criminal activities. Target recently announced it would be closing 9 stores across 4 cities, New York, Seattle, San Francisco, and Portland, due to concerns about employee and customer safety from violence tied to organized retail crime. Part of the challenge in addressing organized retail crime includes the high felony theft thresholds and bail reform laws that have emboldened criminals to participate in organized retail crime. Criminals often pilfer items below the threshold for felony charges, recognizing that such offenses are typically not subject to prosecution in certain jurisdictions. Criminals also know that they will be released under certain weak bail reform laws. Upon release, these criminals proceed to engage in similar or more severe criminal activities without encountering any consequences. I look forward to hearing from San Diego County District Attorney Summer Stephan, who will also be the next president of the National District Attorneys Association, on the important role that prosecutors play in the safety of our communities, including addressing the challenge of organized retail crime. And I also look forward to this hearing as an opportunity for bipartisanship, for us to come together and hopefully agree that we do have a real issue here, and if so, what can we be doing at this level? This surge in retail theft is more than just teenagers looking for a thrill, but it's an abuse of soft-on-crime policies and evidence of a deeper-rooted issue driving crime and fear amongst our communities. We have a distinguished panel of witnesses testifying today, including a federal panel of witnesses to examine efforts to combat the rising trend of organized retail crime. We will also hear from a second panel of witnesses from industry and state government about their perspective on this serious challenge. I'd like to thank all the witnesses with us this afternoon, and I look forward to the discussion. I now recognize the ranking member and my friend, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Pfluger, for working with us to call this hearing on the issue of organized retail crime. Many of us have heard from retailers concerned by organized retail crime, and so today's hearing is for us to explore the scope of the problem and determine best how to respond. Crime overall continues to be at historically low levels and has fallen even more in recent years. According to the FBI, between 1993 and 2022, the violent crime rate across the United States has fallen by more than half, with homicides falling 35%, robberies falling 76%, and burglaries falling 78%. And the trend continues to this day. The FBI reports that violent crime decreased a further 2% in 2022 compared to the previous year. However, we must always strive to do better to ensure that all Americans are safe in their homes, their schools, and their neighborhoods. And we have heard reports of organized retail crime becoming more prevalent, which leads us to today's hearing. We all need to understand the nature of organized retail crime and the best practices for ending it. I want to be clear what we are talking about here. We are not talking about ordinary shoplifting committed by individuals working alone. We are talking about large, organized groups who engage in systematic theft of retail goods and the subsequent resale of stolen goods for financial gain. Organized retail crime does not just impact large retailers, it also affects mom and pop shops and especially retail employees. And beyond the important concerns about safety, these crimes also raise costs for American consumers. Every time a store is robbed of products, has to hire more security, replace broken windows, or install new security systems, some of those costs are inevitably going to be passed on to shoppers. It is important that we get to the root of the problem of organized retail crime to keep people safe and lower costs for everyone across the country. This bipartisan hearing is a chance for us to hear from both industry leaders in retail and from federal law enforcement agencies about their efforts to combat organized retail crime. I want to thank our panelists for joining today and look forward to your remarks. And without any objection, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the final 2 minutes of my opening statement to the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, who has been a leader in Congress on this issue.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Magaziner, for yielding and for holding this important hearing. I have been deeply involved in this for several Congresses as one of the most talked about issues in my office, from business, from law enforcement, and from stakeholders. I witnessed this myself, as far as from me to you, in a Walgreens in my district, and we held a roundtable with some representatives from law enforcement and business, including Home Depot. I agree with all that's been said before, because we know that consumers and employees worry about their own safety. They worry about convenience when shopping, and they just worry that they're going to get caught up in one of these schemes or operations while they're out there during this holiday season. In addition, this retail crime that's organized has considerable monetary effects on the business and on our communities. In Nevada, the Organized Retail Crime Association estimates that in 2021, retail product theft cost our state's economy about $82 million. And no community is immune. You heard from the suburbs to the inner city, from big business to small business. It's particularly troublesome in a real urbanized commercial area like my district in downtown Las Vegas. And retailers have a strong presence there. They make a large contribution to our local economy, and they are targeted. The bill that I've introduced, combating organized retail crime, is bipartisan. There are 47 Republicans, 47 Democrats, and every Democrat on this subcommittee is a co-sponsor, and I'm very proud of that, and I want to thank them for their support. I know this hearing will help highlight some of the increased trends in high-level organized retail crime, and it will underscore the need for federal action to allow DHS and investigators and prosecutors to have the tools they need to go after this organized crime, and also the associations, organizations, and activities that are tied to it behind the scenes that many people don't even realize. So thank you again. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to hearing our expert witnesses.
And I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have two distinguished panels of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. I ask that our first panel please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I'd now like to formally introduce our first panel. Mr. Michael Kroll currently serves as a Homeland Security Investigation Special Agent in charge with the New England Field Office in Boston, Massachusetts. Mr. Jason Kane currently serves as a Special Agent in charge of the U.S. Secret Service's Nashville District. And finally, Mr. Jose Perez serves as the Deputy Assistant Director of the Transnational Organized Crime, Violent Crime, and Operational Support Sections of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your service to this nation. I'd now like to recognize each of the witnesses. I know you have written statements, and we appreciate those. If you can summarize that and keep it to 5 minutes. Mr. Kroll, you are now recognized.
Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss Homeland Security Investigation's global efforts to combat organized retail crime and organized theft groups. As the largest investigative agency within the Department of Homeland Security, HSI has unique authorities and an expansive investigative mandate focused on securing the homeland from transnational crime and threats which impact our national, border, and economic security. Our 6,800 special agents are stationed in 253 domestic field offices and in 93 international offices, while being supplemented by nearly 4,000 state, local, federal, and tribal task force officers, including 14 specialized and vetted host country transnational criminal investigative units, or TCIUs. HSI's operational priorities serve as the foundation of our strategic focus: combating financial crime, investigating cybercrime, preventing crimes of exploitation and victimization, ensuring public safety, upholding fairness in global trade, and protecting national security. The unlawful activity associated with organized retail crime intertwines with many of these aforementioned priorities and therefore represents an area of our investigative focus. In 2022, retail theft was responsible for approximately $72 billion in losses, according to the National Retail Federation. In response to this, HSI initiated Operation Boiling Point 2.0 to effectively communicate the severity of organized theft groups involved in retail crime, cargo theft, and other systemic thefts. Operation Boiling Point 2.0 is a multi-tiered strategy focused on: 1, integration of efforts using enhanced public and private sector partnerships; 2, creating efficiencies of scale and data collection and investigative lead dissemination; 3, using this information to disrupt and dismantle ORC and affiliated organizations; and lastly, using HSI's global reach to engage in a robust public awareness campaign to inform and educate consumers and industry on this threat, among others. It is widely recognized that 21st century polycriminal networks diversify their criminal portfolios to increase profitability and influence. No longer tied to a single criminal scheme or enterprise, it is not uncommon for organized theft groups to be involved in or affiliated with those networks who perpetrate financial fraud, identity theft, human smuggling and trafficking, illicit trade, money laundering, narcotics and weapons trafficking, among many others. One thing remains constant: organized theft groups, as do all criminal networks, must obfuscate the origin of their ill-gotten gains. The use of traditional and trade-based money laundering methods continue, yet digital assets and virtual currencies can now be used with relative ease to facilitate the immediate movement, concealment, and laundering of illicit proceeds. Recognizing the complexity of illicit finance, HSI recently collaborated with the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists to publish a guide for law enforcement investigators and financial crime professionals to help combat ORC and OTGs. Further, HSI's cornerstone outreach interfaces with traditional and non-traditional banking and financial institutions to continue our longstanding efforts to educate our partners on emerging financial threats through anti-money laundering training, including typologies of money laundering associated with ORC. Using existing infrastructure to support our efforts, HSI relies on our National Lead Development Center to coordinate ORC investigations across the full spectrum of law enforcement and private sector partners. This past year, NLDC received 222 referral requests from state and local law enforcement, in addition to private sector partners. This information led to a doubling of HSI investigations from last fiscal year alone. As we continue to see cyber-enabled crime, digital assets, financial fraud, identity theft, complex global trade practices, and other more technical methodologies used in organized retail crime, HSI is well positioned to attack this threat head-on. Thank you again for your support of HSI and for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Kane for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you on the current investigative capabilities of the U.S. Secret Service and how they may be of help addressing the trend of organized retail crime. As one of the nation's original investigative agencies, the Secret Service has been charged with safeguarding the nation's financial system since 1865. This includes conducting criminal investigations to protect the American public, financial institutions, and critical infrastructure from criminal exploitation. Over time, these investigations have evolved from traditional counterfeit in the Civil War to crimes related to electronic fund transfers that become popular in the 1980s. Today, we have extensive authorities to safeguard financial payment systems from criminal exploitation, even as those illicit activities are increasingly transnational in nature and enabled by cyberspace and digital currencies. The Secret Service's primary area of focus with respect to combating organized retail crime are in training our state and local partners and providing shared resources in the form of technical tools. We aid our partners in our specialized abilities to track and seize illicit funds, often in the form of digital assets which are used by transnational criminal organizations to conceal and transfer their ill-gotten gains. The Secret Service has an exceptional record of success in disrupting transnational criminal organizations, and we remain committed to keeping pace with both technology and innovation and the evolving tactics of cyber criminals. Based on our efforts, we prevented over $2.6 billion in fraud in fiscal year 2022. These losses are victim-based and attributable crimes such as business email compromises, pandemic-related fraud, romance scams, and stolen personal information via dark web marketplaces. To aid the Secret Service in our continued law enforcement partnerships, last December, Congress renewed its commitment to the National Computer Forensic Institute by passing legislation that allowed for its continued operation through the end of fiscal year 2028. The legislation has strengthened our capabilities of the Secret Service and our law enforcement partners to combat cyber-enabled crime, including organized retail crime. One of the ongoing efforts are the cyber fraud task forces, which are directly funded by Congress to provide a forensic working environment to support criminal cases. These task forces are in 42 offices across the United States. Through them, we work closely with the U.S. Attorney's Office and law enforcement agencies to ensure that our partners have the most relevant information on criminal trends and tactics used by organized criminal groups. Our well-established and trusted relationships with financial institutions stemming from our origins in combating counterfeit currency affords us the agility to aid with cases involving organized retail crime. We are fully engaged with our partners as partnership is essential to accomplishing our mission. Organized retail crime is a crime of opportunity, and criminals exploit this in both the physical and cyber-enabled space. Efforts to stay ahead of transnational criminal organizations and their capabilities are paramount to helping deter future crimes. While organized retail crime is not a traditional area of focus for federal law enforcement, the capabilities of organized groups to commit these crimes is evident based on the reported annual losses of over $100 billion. The immediate investigative focus of the Secret Service is to disrupt and deter criminal activity and recover any funds stolen from Americans. Longer term, we'll work to ensure those who have criminally exploited our businesses are arrested and successfully prosecuted forthwith. Cyber-enabled crimes are often transnational and multi-jurisdictional in nature, which is why federal assistance, and many times not only warranted, is essential. Based on the current trends related to organized retail crime, I would submit the following 5 principles should help inform congressional efforts to address organized retail crime. One is resourcing. Resourcing is essential to law enforcement's ability to effectively detect, investigate, and arrest those committing these crimes. This must be constant and consistent, not just a reactive measure. Prioritize identifying and seizing assets to prevent illicit profit and recover victim financial losses. If criminals can enjoy their profits, there will be no crime, or more crime. Continue to strengthen the ability of stakeholders to prevent, detect, and investigate crimes by investigating local law enforcement through federal programs such as the Secret Service's National Computer Forensic Institute. This builds the collaborative relationships necessary to address organized retail crime and other cyber-enabled crimes. Partnerships between law enforcement and the private sector are essential. We often say build trust before you need it, as this is vital for an effective response from law enforcement. And lastly, ensure legal authorities that control law enforcement activities keep pace with criminal trends. I'm honored to represent the dedicated men and women of the Secret Service here today. They work tirelessly on behalf of the American people and continue to maintain our standing as one of the world's preeminent law enforcement organizations. The Secret Service appreciates your partnership and your guidance, and they'll welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. The chair now recognizes Mr. Perez for your opening statement of 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here today to speak to you on organized retail theft, more specifically the FBI's Major Theft Program. As noted, my name is Jose Perez. I'm the Deputy Assistant Director in the Criminal Investigative Division. Under my investigative responsibility, I have various programs, including the Violent Crime and Gang Program, Crimes Against Children, and specifically for this committee, Transnational Organized Crime, which includes our Major Theft Program. The FBI has a long and rich history combating organized crime, and we continue to dedicate resources to combat that threat. We use an intelligence-driven approach to identify, disrupt, and dismantle the most egregious talk actors. Criminal organizations are diverse in trade and employ a myriad of criminal activities, ranging from trafficking in narcotics, firearms, and/or persons, to fraud and major theft. The FBI is aware of the continually evolving trend of organized retail theft. We prioritize efforts to combat this threat by working with our law enforcement partners to identify these organizations, disrupt them, and dismantle them using the enterprise theory of investigation and employ sophisticated investigative techniques. Retail theft consistently consists mostly of several state crimes that can quickly evolve into activities used to proliferate transnational organized crime, when stolen goods are transported across state lines or even internationally, or when illicit proceeds from retail crimes are used to fund other transnational criminal activity. To better support these investigations, the FBI partners with state, local, and federal law enforcement around the country through our various task force initiatives to combat both violent crime and organized crime. The FBI leads several major theft task forces around the country that are dedicated towards defeating these criminal organizations involved in interstate transportation of stolen goods. Some of the challenges with investigating organized retail theft is that most of these crimes often appear as state offenses, things like shoplifting, that immediately are not reported to the FBI and may not have clear connections to transnational criminal organization. To address this challenge, the FBI continually partners with state and local law enforcement to share intelligence on crime trends and patterns to create better networks to identify criminal actors. Just this past April, FBI Boston's Organized Crime Task Force arrested 7 members of an organized theft crew. The investigation resulted in collaboration by over 70 police departments throughout the New England area. Several members of the crew were arrested in connection with thefts throughout the region, including catalytic converters stolen from over 470 vehicles, cash from automatic teller machines, and merchandise from jewelry stores. The crew was allegedly responsible for an estimated $2 million in losses throughout the Massachusetts and New Hampshire area between 2022 and 2023. Several of these defendants have been convicted, and the FBI continues to partner with state and local law enforcement agencies in these types of cases. In addition to the major theft program, we also dedicate resources towards retail theft through things like our authority to investigate Hobbs Act violations. These cases, the dollar amount is less important than the overall impact to the community when the theft is facilitated through violence. These crimes might have a lower financial loss associated with them, but the larger impact on the community, in addition to the impact on interstate and foreign commerce, is significant. Additionally, the FBI actively participates in outreach and partnerships to the retail industry and private sector partners. We attend various conferences such as the National Retail Federation Conference. We maintain private sector outreach efforts through our Office of Private Sector and Offices of Private Engagement, and also through FBI headquarters and our 56 field offices around the country. These relationships and industry events are important to maintain active communication, information sharing, and coordination between FBI and retail partners. While recent smash and grab robberies have garnered much media attention, the FBI also focuses on investigating and disrupting complex theft schemes involving targeted retail theft of high-dollar items, such as sophisticated fraud schemes and to steal commercial cargo loads. We work closely with private sector to develop a strategic cargo theft initiative and address the growth in cargo theft and supply chain theft. In March of 2023, CargoNet, an industry association, reported a 600% increase in strategic cargo theft. Some of these cargo theft schemes include identity theft and fraud and cyber-enabled fraud, such as business email compromise. The FBI has also initiated an initiative targeting South American theft groups involving groups coming from Chile and other South American countries, exploiting things like visa waiver program and visa entries to commit crimes and return back to the countries and share some of the proceeds and sell some of the proceeds internationally. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee today, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Members will now be recognized by seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I appreciate the service and what y'all do, and especially your partnership with the state and the local levels. And I think I want to start, just by trends and ask each of you quickly, are there areas, geographic areas, cities that seem to have higher rates of organized retail crime that are being impacted? And I'll start with you, Mr. Coleman. We just go down the line.
Thank you, sir, for that question. We see the polycriminal transnational organizations now no longer tied to a single criminal scheme or enterprise. What we do see is, organized retail crime groups involved in certain, methods and methodologies. I think they are driven by greed and opportunity, not so much location and geographic region.
Mr. Kay, Mr. Perez, quickly, any areas that you see that are being impacted disproportionately?
I would say no areas in particular. I agree with the HSIS Act that I think they're geographical and they tend to take the exploitation where those opportunities can be exploited, i.e., for example, gas pump skimming, which was a huge thing several years back. I-95 seemed to be the corridor. There was no direct location.
Mr. Perez?
So similar comments, our offices around the country, we have 9 major theft task forces. These were developed by individual field offices. They really vary and range from Los Angeles, Memphis, Pittsburgh to West Texas, Sur, and El Paso, where we've established an organized crime task force as well. This is deferred to by our local field offices. I can't speak to one area more than another. We see various trends as mentioned in one corridor. I've seen theft of fuel in West Texas or in your area that are significant, that leads us to establish local partnerships to target some of these unique threats.
What about felony thresholds? Have you seen state by state or jurisdiction by jurisdiction or action from DAs that have led to increases? So let's say the raising of a felony threshold, has that had a effect on the number of organized retail crime events that you see?
Sir, I can't speak to that.
Okay, any other on the panel?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, let's go to for the Secret Service, Mr. Kane. What does the Secret Service see as the largest threat to maintaining a safe environment for financial transactions, whether it be credit cards, gift cards, U.S. currency? What is, kind of talk me through that?
I'm thinking obviously with the holidays hitting, it's high volume, and places like convenience stores and gas stations seem to be the best because they can get a lot of numbers very quickly. Second, kind of on the edge of new things are what they call quishing, which is like the scanning of QR codes, which are not actual QR codes. They actually will take you to a site and ask you to apply information, personal information. That's a new one. And then gift card fraud, which is happening a little bit more prevalently, where people are taking gift cards, re-encoding them in the back, activating them very quickly with limited amounts of money, but then when you go to actually buy the gift card, you're loading the dollar up. So combating that is a little tough. It's a bit more heavy on the retailers. And then at the local level, the convenience store level, it's just really on the locals. Again, the person using these ATM/sliders, they need to make sure that those devices are legitimate as best they can. We always say, give it a tug. It might come apart. You never know.
Mr. Kroll, we're talking about Operation Boiling Point, focused on combating this organized retail crime trend. How many organized retail crime investigations has HSI's Boston field office conducted? And can you identify any red tape or roadblocks that have stood in the way between effective partnerships with the state and local level?
Thank you for that question. We do have active investigations ongoing now. I don't have a historical number, but certainly those that are international in scope and ones that involve our federal, state, and local partners spread throughout New England. What I will say, I don't see any red tape. What I see is just the necessity to prioritize the myriad of crimes that we see as federal agents. We see kind of 3 tiers of retail crime. One, your single scope, who may, steal out of necessity, to your more coordinated groups who might not reach in interstate commerce. And then 3, which is where I think federal agents should be, is the more sophisticated networks, those that are involved in cyber-enabled crime and maybe, some more sophisticated methodologies. But we do see the gap between 1 and 2 with our state, local, and private sector partners, which, sir, to your point, is why we established.
Are these events deterring or scaring the public? Is it something that's scaring the public and deterring businesses from having open stores in different places?
Sir, what I could say is, obviously the awareness of the crime has been certainly something that we've seen much more of, whether in the media or within law enforcement. And I think the awareness of the crime is something that's going to help us to attack those networks and make sure that we have an impact.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all again for your public service and for coming here today. I think one of the things that we are challenged with as we have this conversation with organized retail crime is it's difficulties with the data. To Chairman Pfluger's question about are there certain areas where this is more prevalent, to questions about is this becoming more prevalent over time, which we're hearing from the retailers it is, and we believe them, but the data is spotty. So I guess I want to just ask each of you, are you able to get, as agencies, the data that you need from local law enforcement, from retailers, to help you anticipate the trends And if not, are there things that we can be doing at the policy level to help fill in those data gaps so that we can better wrap our hands around the situation and how to deal with it? And so I'll open it up to any of you.
Thank you for that question, and certainly to that point is why HSI established Operation Boiling Point 2.0. 4 pillars to establish and enhance public and private sector partnerships. 2, we have dissemination, but also acquisition of information that's going to help us disrupt those organized retail crime networks. And then lastly, make sure that we're, enhancing our public awareness campaign. I think to that point is understanding the data is understanding the threat. And for us in law enforcement, I think I speak on behalf of Secret Service and FBI when I say the more information we have, the better prepared we are to address not only existing threats, but emerging threats that maybe we don't see. To that point, certainly cyber-enabled crime is something that we're significantly concerned about, and I think your network intrusions and your data breaches and that information that maybe not be public is certainly a concern to law enforcement, and I think we could be a benefit to our private sector partners to help them resolve and mitigate those threats.
Thank you.
Sir, one of the things, we obviously with our NCFI facility, we'll train 5,000 people or law enforcement agencies this year throughout all your districts. Those would become the barometers for kind of fraud and kind of what's happening in those sectors. That becomes my data resource because my CFTF are telling me very robustly this is kind of occurring in our district. Here's where we should apply some resources. One area we've obviously talked about for us is Countering Money Laundering Act of 2023, which is something we've suggested, which kind of helps us obviously go after unlicensed money launderers, because we believe if you can hit the pocketbooks of bad actors, then they will obviously find a new crime to participate in. That's the two things.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd echo similar to what my colleagues have said as far as collaboration and communication. For the FBI nationally, we've tried to improve some framework to collect that information from law enforcement through our Criminal Justice Information Service and through our NIBRS program to collect that data from law enforcement. That data is only as good as what's being put into our databases, if you will. So we try to expand that and augment that through our collaborations individually with our field offices. The task force concept for us is tried and true for all of federal law enforcement, where we sit in a co-located environment with our state and local partners. At times, we'll embed with them in fusion centers or in police departments around the country to really be on the front lines to receive that data and better leverage that information. And then additionally, on the outreach piece, as I mentioned, we have elements dedicated towards private sector engagement, our Domestic Security Alliance Council, the DSAC program, to really have direct contact and outreach with our private sector partners to include the retail industry. Also, the specific efforts we do out of our major theft program to have discussions, attend these conferences, and really be part of that discussion to articulate to receive what that need is from the retail companies to better receive that data so we can make decisions.
Thank you. With the time I have left, just one more question. As we mentioned earlier, I mean, we're not talking about individual shoplifters here. We're talking about, in many cases, sophisticated organizations that are stealing these goods at scale for resale. They're doing this to make money by selling these goods on the black market or online or what have you. So can you talk a little bit about what your agencies are doing at that point of resale to try to disrupt what these organizations are doing? Because I would think that oftentimes it's easier to catch them potentially at the resale point than it is at the store level.
Thank you, sir, for that question. And might I just add that the INFORM Act will certainly help us do that to understand those that are involved in e-commerce platforms and third-party sellers and resellers. And that's certainly something that at our Innovation Lab and Cybercrime Center and Cross-Border Financial Crime Center, we're working very closely on.
I mean, obviously, for those in the computer forensics part, and we live kind of in the dark web marketplaces for a lot of things. Those are great areas to kind of what I call make your case, but then we also have to forensically prove it. So that's obviously those two key elements for us are kind of helping put the point on what you just asked.
Similarly, we focus a lot on the dark net, a lot of movement of illicit proceeds, narcotics, weapons, and stolen goods in the dark net. we'll look at those cases. Sometimes the resale portion, depending if it's in mass, we'll look at it and try to identify the organization. If it's more individualized, we can use that to begin a case and develop that intelligence to determine where the merchandise is coming from. And we look for ways to identify those networks and disrupt them through those patterns. The goal there is to, again, identify, work up the chain. So sometimes identifying the money movement as well that comes in return from some of the sale of goods really helps us identify where these networks are.
Thank you. I'm over time, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Are lax local prosecutorial practices concerning property crime contributing to the organized retail crime that you've described?
So again, I can't speak to that. I can tell you that we work aggressively within the federal scope, the statutes that we have, whether it's for interstate transportation of stolen goods or things like Hobbs Act. Those are violations that we'll investigate aggressively. At times, we can leverage state prosecution as well if for some reason we can't charge a case federal, so we'll work aggressively to leverage both.
Are lax border control policies contributing to the development of transnational criminal organization conducted organized retail crime?
I can't speak to that either, sir.
Either of you other gentlemen, can you speak to it?
Sir, what I could say is we're certainly laser focused on criminal networks, in those criminal networks that affect our national border and economic security, whether they reside internationally or domestically. I think we're, between our border enforcement security task forces, our transnational investigative units overseas, and our international presence, we are laser focused both on your traditional arrest, indictment, conviction, but also your non-traditional, which would be, your cyber intrusion mitigation, obviously in other more complex methods to investigate transnational crime.
Mr. Kane?
I mean, sir, we've obviously had several cases, to your point, actually a joint case with HSI in California regarding EBT fraud. And the groups are, Eastern European, obviously coming in and kind of subverting the border process. We had problems identifying them, so we do see it, but I see it on a very limited scale, not to the scale that I would say that maybe the Bureau and HSI sees it.
Have there been reductions in local police forces? My impression that at least during the pandemic and following the George Floyd killing and the issues relating to that we saw police forces decline, a lot of sort of a surge in resignations of police forces locally. Is that still the case, or has there been a recovery from that? Mr. Kane?
I mean, sir, obviously locally, I think I don't, as far as resignations, I don't know. I do think there is a challenge in recruitment for local law enforcement. There's a recruitment challenge at our level to get people on the books, so to speak. I can't say that it's attributable to those events, though.
Mr. Perez?
Same, sir. I'm aware nationally of some decline in recruitment, and that's always a challenge similarly for us, for all the federal departments and law enforcement. I can't speak to as to the why. I know in the following COVID, that obviously had an effect nationally. I can't speak to whether there's an upswing or not, sir, currently.
Mr. Kroll?
Thank you, sir. We recognize the troubles that our state and local partners have in recruiting. I think that's one area where federal law enforcement can certainly lend assistance to our partners where they need it. I think some of the more non-traditional methods where we're assisting state and local law enforcement partners, whether in violent crime, narcotics trafficking, weapons trafficking, and other areas, certainly in organized theft groups, we can provide those resources to them, through our task force officer program. We have 4,000 task force officers domestically. We can help to augment their local police departments with possibly resources, data sets, and other information that they might not have available to them.
I'm familiar that in Asheville, North Carolina, for example, there's an enormous loss of police force. Cities throughout North Carolina, I'm more familiar with that than other cities in the country. There's been a tremendous impairment of the police force, of the size of the police force. They're way down from their anticipated numbers. It strikes me, and I certainly appreciate the fact that you guys are sort of not really, in some cases, wanting to attribute causes of the problem that we face, and you're dealing with it as law enforcement, and I respect what you have to do. It does seem to me that while we can help treat symptoms by doing more information sharing and task force and resource provision, if we've caused a lot of the problem by not sufficiently backing law enforcement and a lot of policymakers have given inadequate support to law enforcement. If we have prosecutors who've decided not to prosecute property crimes, if we have a border that is uncontrolled and it gives rise to transnational criminal organization-led bands that go across the country and do this type of crime, we're probably not going to solve the problem until we address those problems. So that's just my observation, but I certainly appreciate the efforts that you bring to the case every single day, and all those men and women that work in your agencies. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on Mr. Bishop's comments. Data, information, and if I can ask the three of you, how much of this is organized crime versus retail crime, that is shoplifting? Do you have any guesstimates here?
Sure, thank you. The data that we have is certainly something that we need to work better on and to understand it with our private and state and local partners. I can't speak to exactly the difference between, kind of a more retail crime versus.
And I ask you that because I want to make sure we're not operating in silos, and if we are, that we try to get away from that. Mr. Perez mentioned the Chilean gangs. That was an issue that popped up in my county, Orange County, California. My local DA brought it up to our attention, and we brought it up to the Fed's attention. We changed the visa program, visa waiver program, and we hope that helps to begin to solve the problem. But I can't help but think that sometimes we're chasing our own tail, and we're always a little bit too late to the party, so to speak. And so sharing information almost on a real-time basis, I think, is key to figuring out the patterns, the trends, what is emerging. I mean, from the Chile situation, we found out it was the Romanians are also involved in this, and a lot of groups. But, looking at the retail versus the shoplifting versus the organized crime, you got crypto, you got a lot of interesting things working here, but we clearly want to protect our communities from those losses. We clearly want to protect the retailers as well. But we want to figure out a big picture as to how to go about coming up with good solutions. And like Mr. Bishop said, a lot of our law enforcement numbers are down, and that's a big issue, and we've got to figure out some solutions there. But, smash and grab, organized crime, retail theft, it's hard to figure out which is which, but if you don't know which is which, then it's even harder to come up with a good solution. And I look forward to working with all of you and trying to figure this out, get some real data, so that based on that data, folks up here can come up with good public policy with the administration and come up with real solutions in real time. Let me ask you another question, which is, we talk about cooperation, federal, state, local. What about international? Do you feel like you're getting the type of cooperation that you need from international players out there that might be part of the solution here? Mr. Crow.
Thank you, sir, and appreciate that comment. Certainly, our investigative presence overseas is the largest that DHS has. And working through our host country transnational criminal investigative units, very important to receiving information. As you know, sir, our authorities as special agents in the international footprint differs in that in the United States. So we certainly rely on their knowledge, their investigators, their prosecutors, and others to make sure that we're receiving the appropriate information, we're able to act on that.
Mr. Kane.
Sir, I believe that the information international connections right now that we have are better than they've been in my 22 years.
They've been getting better.
They're getting better. And I believe that because now information just flows so much easier between our countries. And then two, the informal agreements of like what we can provide and what they can provide us is back. So certain countries, as you know, will never work with us. But many along the way have been very good to us, and especially very good to our investigations. Yes, sir.
Mr. Perez.
So overall, I'd say relationships are good, maybe in a better situation as well. I know we position agents strategically. We have in our legal attaché offices well over, I believe, 60 around the world. More specific to this threat, when we talked about the South American theft group, sir, we've pre-positioned, in addition to our legal attachés, we supplemented that office in Santiago, Chile to add additional bodies. We have legal attachés in Mexico. We've also supplemented that with what we refer to as our border liaison officers. These are FBI agents that sit on this side of the border and are cross-designated to operate in Mexico to collect information and communicate more directly with our counterparts.
I'm glad to hear you say that because it's not your problem. It's not their problem. It's our problem.
Yes, sir.
A victim, whether it's a family that gets a family member kidnapped in Mexico or held for ransom in Mexico, it usually affects a family here in the U.S. as well. And again, it's not your problem, it's our problem. In the last 2 seconds I have, I'd say, offer to work with us any legislative solutions, any diplomatic solutions. Let us know, we're here to help. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm out of time and I yield.
The gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito, for your questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Thank you all for your service and for being here. It seems that one of the primary hurdles to successful prosecution of organized criminal groups repeatedly targeting retail businesses is the difficulty to tie an individual or group to multiple incidents across several jurisdictions, such as patterns, rather than looking at each incident individually, which fails to recognize the toll the group may have and may be taking on a particular retailer. I want to thank the chairman for his work in this committee, and one of the things that we've been focusing on, the committee that I chair, the Subcommittee of Emergency Management and Technology, is communication and cooperation between different agencies. I spent a career in the NYPD, and I think that as law enforcement professionals, we could probably say that one of the greatest tools in our tool belt is communication with other agencies. So I think what's important for those that are listening back home and for those here, what resources are available from agencies like yours that could specifically help local and state agencies so that we can do a better job?
So again, I go back highlighting our task force initiatives around the country, so developing things like our Safe Streets, organized crime task forces that have unique threats, unique responsibilities, establishing our major theft task forces, and then separately, the OCDF program for the department, for the FBI, for other elements of the department is really our core model for collaboration, communication, and deconfliction, both at the federal and state level. So we're working with our partners in OCDF to actually develop a strategic initiative to help target organized retail theft, to really just better allow resources and funding and communication efforts at the federal and state level throughout the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would echo IOC2, which is a center that we obviously, all of the federal agencies here at the table deconflict in. That's a great resource for federal level. State level has some other challenges because they don't all talk to each other. However, a lot of them participate, NYPD does, in the Accurate database, which kind of allows all state agencies to talk. But our cyber fraud task force, similar to these other task forces, again, that's how we kind of inject tools, resources. Again, that's funded by you. That goes directly back out to the offices. That's how we do it. It's been highly successful. I was telling the gentleman here today, 80% of some of the forensic work I do is not even for my agency. It's for state and local agencies.
Sir, thank you. Having worked in New York City, I know NYPD's finest very well, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I can certainly speak to our centers of excellence, cross-border financial crime, our cybercrime center, our National Intellectual Property Rights and Coordination Center, and many, many others, Innovation Lab. Certainly, they're all great centers that provide great resources and information to federal agencies, and I think what we're doing, and we need to do a better job, is making sure that we're reaching into our private sector and state and local partners to ensure that they understand the resources available to them. I think the National Intellectual Property Rights Center that we lead is certainly a great example of the private sector and public partnerships that we need to use to enhance our investigations. I think until we have those, kind of that holistic view and whole of government and private sector view on crime, it'll be tough for us to attack this threat.
So, Mr. Kroll, to your point, I think that very often we see that the resources that you guys provide, which are amazing, are very often, I guess, from the top down. And I guess my question is, how can we do a better job making sure exactly what you mentioned, these smaller law enforcement agencies. I mean, you go back to my district where I represent many villages. Some of those villages have their own police departments and deal with retail crime every single day. They may not be afforded the same opportunities like the big ones, like the NYPD and other big law enforcement agencies. So not only, I guess, what can we do as members of Congress to make sure that our law enforcement professionals know exactly the resources that you provide? And I guess the secondary part of that question is, how can we, on both sides of the aisle, work with you guys to make sure that, one, those resources are there, and number two, that those smaller agencies, even the ones that are tucked in those small towns, who unfortunately are battling these issues right on their main streets, how can we make sure that they have the information that they need to take advantage of the great work that you guys are doing?
And I'd ask briefly, please, as the time is expiring.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chairman.
I would just say we need to be non-traditional in our approach, and that is possibly, inserting our special agents and their subject matter expertise into local police departments, much like we have our task force officer program, 4,000 state and local task force officers. It is educate the educator, really train the trainer, let them be the best resource for their local police department to come to HSI or Secret Service or FBI or ATF or wherever it may be. Certainly we do that in Rhode Island, we do it in Bennington, Vermont, and Rutland, Vermont, and other areas. So I think it's a national model that we all use.
Thank you guys very much. I would love to follow up with you guys with a conversation after this. Mr. Chairman, I know my time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned earlier that I had witnessed some of this organized crime, and it was in a Walgreens, and a person came up with a backpack and just started scraping eyelashes into the backpack. Now, eyelashes aren't power tools, I'll give you that, but look around, there's certainly a market for it, and they don't sell it directly. They sell it to somebody at a swap meet who sells it, or they sell the drill to somebody who sells it on the internet. So it really is a network. And I went up to the clerk and I said, "Did you see what that guy just did?" And she said, "Yeah, he comes in here about once a week, but the companies have told us not to do anything about it because we might get hurt or the customers might get hurt." And all of us have been in stores where you now see everything is locked down and you have to call a clerk to come over and help you retrieve something. You can't just pull it off the shelf. So it's dangerous, it's inconvenient, and it's costing tax money as well as business profit. I hear these questions of what can we do to help you do your job better. And I would ask you, Mr. Kroll, to talk more about Operation Boiling Point. It seems to me it's kind of like fusion centers that we have in communities where all different kinds of law enforcement and first responders and the private sector. In my district, Las Vegas, nobody has a better eye in the sky than gaming does to try to address this. And in my bill, HR 895, it's a provision to house a center to combat organized retail crime within HSI. And I wonder if you might comment on how that would help us to bring information together or be one-stop shop or complement what you're doing.
Thank you very much for your longstanding efforts in this space. Understanding I can't speak to legislation that is still ongoing and hasn't been signed into law. What I can say is that we have seen a similar model used many, many times before, and that model is not new. Multi-agency command centers, multi-agency deconfliction centers that involve the private and public sector and law enforcement partners are certainly the best case and best model for us to continue. Operation Boiling Point 2.0 is really recognition of this threat, but also trying to take a little bit more proactive stance to identify, what partners we need to be in contact with. How do we share information with them better? But how do we gain information from possibly private sector that we don't already have, and then use that information more effectively to target these retail crime and organized theft groups? And lastly, I think, we talk about public awareness, but really this is buyer beware. The consumer needs to be the best proponent of their money and where they're buying products from. They're really the first line of defense next to our state and local partners. So I would say, certainly anything we can do to support the consumer and industry and ensure economic security, I think that's an important piece of Boiling Point 2.0.
I think the inconvenience and perhaps the danger of going into a neighborhood where you have a store that's been attacked a number of times, is driving people to shop on the internet more and more. And that, of course, raises other kind of problems. But we heard that these organized groups use the money for drug trade, but also for human trafficking. Can you talk about that, Mr. Kane? Are you familiar with anybody talk about that as a connection to this?
I mean, most of the crimes that were under our purview usually don't lend itself to human trafficking, but probably more in one of my colleagues.
Okay, in either one.
Man, we do have a human trafficking program. I can't speak to any connection specifically to organized retail theft. As I mentioned earlier, criminal organizations for us are diverse, so they're always going to look for an opportunity to make money, whether that's retail theft, trafficking in persons, drugs, guns, whatever allows them the ability to make money. I haven't seen a direct correlation between the two, but really that speaks to the need for what we've been talking about collectively, which is continued collaboration, collection, sharing of intelligence, and collaboration amongst all law enforcement partners.
Gentlelady yields. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I wanted to say thank you to the gentlemen on the panel for your careers in law enforcement. I did notice, though, when Chairman Pfluger asked if any of you saw any trends in the explosion of organized retail crime, none of you responded with any trends that you guys were noticing. That struck me as interesting because I know that you guys are all really smart or you wouldn't be here. Isn't part of being an effective member of law enforcement having the ability to spot trends and pattern recognition? Mr. Kroll?
Yeah, certainly appreciate your concern and recognize your question. Of course, we focus on emerging threats and existing threats, and truly to respond to those is something that we do every day. I think the cyber-enabled crime front is one that we're certainly dealing with right now. Network intrusions and data breaches, and especially items, identity, licenses, financial information sold on the dark web is something that concerns most of us. I would say that would certainly be a trend that we would look to.
Okay, thank you. Do you think having maybe a billionaire like George Soros spending $40 million of his own money supporting leftist prosecutors and DAs who are soft on crime might have something to do with it? Is that a trend that might have something to do with the insanity that we see in America's cities right now?
Thanks for your question, sir. I'd respectfully withhold comment on that one.
Smart. Mr. Kane?
Sorry, I just wouldn't have the context to be able to provide an intelligible answer that would.
Okay. Mr. Perez? Think that might be a trend that has something to do with the lawlessness that we see going on in American cities right now?
Sir, no, I can't comment on that.
Okay. How about lowering the felony thresholds, as Mr. Pfluger brought up? Do you think that has anything to do with it? Same answer? I respect the fact that you gentlemen are got to be careful. I get it. But do you think that might be a trend that has something to do with the out-of-control retail crime that we see going on across the U.S.?
Sir, I can't comment on that. As I mentioned earlier, the federal statutes that allow us to investigate these crimes are ample, and we investigate them aggressively.
Okay. Well, to be honest, though, Mr. Perez, the federal statutes really have nothing to do with whether or not you're able to spot some of these trends that everybody in the country knows and understands. Everybody knows what's going on. It's so obvious. Let me give you guys a little research that I just did up here right now. This is from Forbes. Target blames organized crime for closing 9 stores across the U.S. Guess what cities they were in? New York, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Oakland. Any trends there? We all know. Thank you. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yeah.
Mr. Perez, picking up on this line of questioning, does the inclusion of a consequence, of a penalty, a prison sentence, of a fine, deter criminal activity?
Sir, that's an opinion. I know that I could speak to that. I know
You're a law enforcement, you're with the FBI.
Yes, sir.
If there's a severe penalty, does that prevent crime from happening?
I know that if it prevents crime from happening, I can tell you that at times we'll leverage what would be stiffer sentences in the federal system to garner maybe better cases or some type of cooperation that leads us to really garner a better intelligence.
Mr. Kane, do penalties have an impact on deterrence of criminal activity?
I think it has a determinant on cooperation or pursuing further cases, absolutely.
Okay. I think the point of this is trying to pinpoint why organized retail crime is happening. It's affecting the safety of our communities. When I read the day one memo from District Attorney Bragg that says he's directing his assistant district attorneys not to prosecute several crimes, including trespassing, resisting arrest, engaging in prostitution, and other things, and that armed robbery should not be prosecuted as felonies, does that have an impact on organized retail crime in New York City, Mr. Kroll?
Sir, thank you for that question. What I would say is I would echo their comments is that, certainly greed has a huge factor. I would say that, the length of potential, jail time certainly has an impact on a criminal's mens rea, if you will. But outside of that, I can't really speak to what a prosecutor would prefer to see.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired. He yields back. I'd like to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony. And at this point in time, seeing no other members to question, the first panel is dismissed. Thank you for your time today. I now invite the second panel to take their seats. And as an administrative note, we know that there are votes that are coming up, so we're going to continue to roll straight into this. Give you a second to switch out and take your notes. Okay. I'm pleased to have a second distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. And I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I would now like to formally introduce our second panel. Mr. David Johnson serves as the Vice President of Asset Protection and Retail Operations for the National Retail Federation. In this role, he leads initiatives and member programs focused on asset protection and store operations, facilitating engagement across the industry and promoting best practices and policy initiatives around crime, violence, loss, and issues challenging the profitability of retail store operations. Mr. Johnson has over 3 decades of global loss prevention and corporate security expertise and experience. Mr. Scott Glenn serves as Vice President of Asset Protection for Home Depot. In this role, Mr. Glenn is responsible for Home Depot's security systems, threat assessments, and corporate security. Prior to his time at the Home Depot, Mr. Glenn spent 9 years with the Sears Corporation, where he served as Corporate Vice President of Asset and Profit Protection and Chief Security Officer, and has served on a board for the Loss Prevention Foundation, Loss Prevention Magazine, and Retail Industry Leaders Association. Ms. Abby Jagoda is Vice President of Public Policy for the International Council of Shopping Centers. Ms. Jagoda has been involved in public policy initiatives on behalf of the marketplaces industry since 2013, and manages ICSC's public policy agenda related to organized retail crime, among other policy issues of interest to the marketplaces industry. Prior to her time there, Ms. Jagoda served as a public policy advisor at Blank Rome Government Relations and as a co-op fellow in the offices of Senator Edward M. Kennedy and Congressman Barney Frank. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Ms. Summer Steffen, who serves as District Attorney for the County of San Diego and is the current President-elect of the National District Attorneys Association. In addition, DA Steffen holds national leadership positions which include co-chair of the National Association of Women, Judges Human Trafficking Committee. I thank all of our witnesses for joining us today and for your time. Mr. Johnson, you are now recognized for your opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and distinguished members of the committee for inviting me to testify on behalf of the National Retail Federation and the retail industry on the issue of organized retail crime. We've submitted a longer statement for the record, and my testimony will summarize that submission. NRF is the world's largest retail trade association, representing Main Street retailers and national chain brands. As an industry, retail contributes $3.9 trillion to annual GDP and supports 1 in 4 U.S. jobs. That's 52 million working Americans. Before joining the NRF, I spent 36 years as an asset protection professional, from apprehending shoplifters from a major city department store to holding various roles with a national retailer. My previous position was leading the corporate security and asset protection teams for a multi-brand global restaurant organization. I have witnessed firsthand the evolution and progression of theft across the retail industry. Shoplifting and organized retail crime is not new. However, the landscape of today is unprecedented and unmatched. The frequency of theft, the openness and brazenness of the criminals, the violence, and the quantities and type of merchandise stolen are truthful indicators of criminal activity beyond amateur or opportunistic shoplifting for need. These are markers toward the proliferation and evolution of organized retail crime. ORC networks orchestrate, influence, and create demand for those committing theft and fraud in our retail environments. Shoplifting, cargo theft, burglaries, smash and grabs, and various frauds are just a means to their end. Varying in scope and scale, these networks range from loosely organized, local and regional groups to highly sophisticated hierarchies operating at a transnational level. These criminal groups thrive on enabling others to commit their crimes. They prey on the homeless, the addicted, and even the victims of human trafficking. They profit from the reselling of stolen goods online, rechanneling and redistributing goods back into our marketplace, and the transportation of stolen goods and proceeds beyond our border. We believe that these groups use organized retail crime as a gateway crime, with profits funding more nefarious activities, including drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. These groups must be the focus of our local, state, and federal efforts. The impact of organized retail crime and its underlying crimes extends far beyond retailers' profitability. Retailers continue to spend billions of dollars to protect their goods, their workers, and consumers, including measures that have impacted the shopping experience. Customers have experienced shortened store hours or restricted product availability. Small businesses and national brands have closed locations, creating community tax revenue loss and the inability of its residents to easily obtain goods. Despite what some people say, ORC is not a victimless crime. Violence continues to escalate, as several retailers have already recorded upwards of more than 100% increase in assaults and violent acts over the past year alone. Employee injuries and deaths have occurred, as recently as last week in the city of Philadelphia. Retailers have increased violence prevention training, mental health support, and security presence to keep their employees safe. The fear of violence in some communities have impacted employee retention and hampered labor efforts in an already tight labor market. Criminals involved with ORC continue to take advantage of jurisdictions with higher felony thresholds, lesser penalties for theft, and communities lacking law enforcement resources. Even when law enforcement engages, coordination and investigation across jurisdictions are often a challenge. As a far too common example, one of our members is currently dealing with a group of 70 individuals traveling to more than 190 of their locations, committing over 350 incidents of shoplifting and fraud. Although some were apprehended, the majority remain at large due to investigative challenges with various law enforcement and differing prosecutorial requirements across multiple states. The Combating Organized Retail Crime Act will support retailers against such criminal organizations. The creation of a federal interagency center within Homeland Security investigations will bring together information sharing and investigative support to federal, state, local, and tribal agencies. Changes to the U.S. Criminal Code provide increased enforcement tools to help reduce cross-jurisdictional crimes. With federal coordination, collaboration, support, and resources, we can bring the fight to these organized groups across our nation. As I close, please consider 3 key points. First, without a doubt, the issue of organized retail crime has a serious impact on retail and will continue to worsen without appropriate action. Second, this is not a retail-only issue to solve. It requires all of government, a whole community approach. And finally, Congress took an important step in passing the Informed Consumers Act last year. On behalf of the retail industry, I urge and encourage you to take the next step forward with the passage of Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The chair now recognizes Ms. Steffen for your opening statement of 5 minutes. Can you turn your microphone on? Thank you.
Should I start over? Good afternoon, Chairman Fulger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and honorable members of the subcommittee. My name is Summer Steffen, and I'm the elected District Attorney of San Diego County, and also the President-elect of the National District Attorneys Association. I've devoted my entire professional life to serving our community and keeping it safe. 33 years, that's longer than I've been alive not doing this. This is why this issue is very important to me. It is not just an economic issue. If you go to the ground level and actually talk to the employees in the stores, you will sense the fear and the trauma and how much impact this has on human beings. There's hardly anyone who doesn't have a family member working in the retail industry. And to subject an industry where they don't sign up for a world of law enforcement, where there are daily threats, they sign up for what should be a safe industry, and instead it's turned into the Wild West. From my ground level view, I appreciate bringing the voice of the victims to this committee and for your attention to this really, really important issue. You've heard the reports of the loss of jobs and also the reports about the increase in violence are the most important and impactful. I have made combating retail theft and organized retail theft a priority in my office because of what I've seen, the impact it has on my community. I wanted to send a very clear message that we have the rule of law, that we will use every tool in our possession to bring justice and accountability. Because of that, I formed a specialized team that has gone after this issue, organizing along with our state and local police officers in order to identify the perpetrators. There are 3 key challenges. First, that the evolution of this criminal industry involves more networks that are more organized and therefore are better able to hide their identities. They're usually masked up. They even have their license plates covered up. There's a lot of premeditation that goes into it, which means that our investigation efforts have to be more sophisticated. Second, we have a very inadequate legal framework, meaning we have very weak laws that deal with these issues. And this has helped this kind of crime become less accountable. The third key challenge is coordination, that there wasn't in the past good coordination between the retail industry, between local law enforcement, prosecutors, and the state and federal level coordination. Here are just some examples in San Diego County to show you how prolific this is. By the way, we've prosecuted 76 defendants for organized retail theft, and we track organized retail theft in our system separate from regular theft. 76 defendants, only 3 cases that I'll mention are more than $1.25 million. An Ulta store theft of $700,000 of multiple stores, $350,000 in Victoria's Secret, $230,000 for the Sunglass Hut store. How many sunglasses can one person need? The prosecution was made possible by a new law that passed in 2019 that targets specifically organized retail theft and allows us to aggregate something that we're not able to do for regular theft. By the way, Chairman Pfluger, your state was able, as you know, recently to put together a task force similar to what we have in San Diego. We also work with the California Highway Patrol because most of these organized thieves travel from county to county and they don't stick to one county, also making their detection difficult. We supported the INFORM Act, but the INFORM Act is not funded. So we encourage that there be funding specifically in order to better enforce the INFORM Act. Also, we support the coordination center that many members of this committee has asked for, because being able to bring together the resources in one coordination center is a proven tool that is effective. Working with the NDAA, it has been a pleasure to see the coordinated efforts come to fruition, including a national walkthrough where we walked through 100 stores with other prosecutors' offices to see for ourselves the problems. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We stand ready to assist and answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Steffen. The chair now recognizes Mr. Glenn for your opening statement of 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the Home Depot and our 470,000 plus associates, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about organized retail crime and its growing impact on the retail community. My name is Scott Glenn, and I'm the Vice President of Asset Protection at the Home Depot. We operate over 2,000 big box retail stores in the U.S., and my job is to ensure the protection of our associates, customers, and assets. I'm here today to talk about why ORC is an increasing problem to our customers and associates and how we can work together to stop this threat. A critical step that Congress can and should take is to help stop this brazen theft is to pass the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. Many have asked if retailers and the media are overhyping the problem. The fact is that retailers were faced with many challenges over the past few years, and ORC is one that is clearly sustained. Its impact has caused the Home Depot and many of our peer retailers to take measures that we would not have even considered years ago. Today, we're locking up valuable product, employing off-duty police and security officers, and even putting police cars on the front aprons of our stores, along with many other tactics that we wouldn't have used in the past. Despite these efforts, the problem continues, and we've even tragically lost a few associates to this issue, as was noted in the opening statement. So in short, the answer is no. Retailers are not exaggerating the problem. We know firsthand in our stores the impact has grown incrementally. And while at some level theft is a cost of doing business, the recent rise in ORC and its consequences are what bring me here today. There's the myth that ORC rings happen only in big cities. Unfortunately, criminals don't discriminate when it comes to targeting stores, and ORC is happening everywhere, in urban and suburban environments and everywhere in between. Generally, the intent of ORC bad actors is to resell and monetize product as quickly as possible. Our law enforcement partners often find these crimes linked to other more sinister activities, such as drug, gun, and even human trafficking. I want to be very clear that we're not talking about petty shoplifting. We're talking about theft for greed, not theft for need. And in many cases, theft to fund ongoing criminal enterprises. This large-scale, multi-jurisdictional activity that is carefully choreographed, sophisticated criminal rings are recruiting individuals from vulnerable populations to steal. As I stated, my top priority is customer and associate safety. Since 2020, we've seen a significant uptick in our store and asset protection associates coming into violent contact with bad actors. These individuals are becoming increasingly aggressive, they are dangerous, and often care little about any consequence other than getting out of the store with as much as possible. Our associates have been threatened with knives, guns, and other physical attacks. I believe there's three primary root causes for this increase. First, the availability of drugs, particularly opioids and fentanyl, and specifically their availability has driven a need for easy and fast cash. Secondly, the rise of third-party marketplaces allows criminals to anonymously resell stolen or counterfeit goods. We see this happening even on reputable platforms, which has made it easy to monetize product and sell them at scale. To fight this, the Home Depot strongly supported the Informed Consumers Act. The last contributor is an increasing lack of resources and support for local, state, and federal law enforcement assistance. Retailers need help in disrupting these criminal activities. But let's talk about solutions. The Home Depot is working hard to address all three underlying causes. First, we've grown our investigative team by over 180% since 2016. In stores, we're using technology and physical deterrence. These include everything from increased security personnel to secure lockup enclosures to smart shopping carts to machine learning and data analysis. We've also launched a program called Game Plan, where we invite local law enforcement and politicians to visit our stores and see this technology and tactics in action, and to help educate proactively and build relationships. To address online concerns, we've added resources and implemented technology tools to identify bad actors using the cover of online marketplaces. A federal task force would allow us to expand upon the progress made at the local and state levels and give us all a greatly needed nationwide partner. The Home Depot strongly supports the Bipartisan Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, introduced in the House by Representatives Buck, Titus, Joyce, and Lee, and in the Senate by Senator Cortez Masto and Grassley, and supported by several members of this subcommittee, including Representatives Magaziner, D'Esposito, Correa, Gonzalez, and Goldman. As a professional in the field of protecting customers and associates, I ask that all members of Congress work together to ensure that the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act becomes the law of the land to help stop these senseless crimes in our communities. I thank you for the opportunity to tell our stories and look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. The chair now recognizes Ms. Jagoda for your opening statement.
Chairman Pfluger, Ranking Member Magaziner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to appear before you today with our partnering organizations and leaders to discuss the strategies of the International Council of Shopping Centers, or ICSC, in combating organized retail crime, or ORC. ICSC's nearly 50,000 North American members represent marketplace professionals, including owner-developers of retail centers, as well as retail tenants, investors, economic development, and legal professionals. ICSC promotes industry advancement for the spaces where people shop, dine, work, play, and gather as foundational and vital ingredients of communities and economies. Today's retail centers are no strangers to change. Many in this room might remember with fondness their first job, their first date, or providing your wish list to the mall's Santa Claus. Where you once might have found department stores or food court dining, you might now discover fitness centers, breweries, animal shelters, or pickleball courts. But despite these changes, traditional retailers remain the overwhelming majority of shopping center tenants, and 70% of them are small businesses. Sadly, retail property owners are facing an unprecedented number of ORC incidents. ORC involves the illegal acquisition of retail merchandise in substantial quantities through both theft and fraud as part of an unlawful commercial enterprise. And as Ranking Member Magaziner noted, it's important to distinguish ORC from traditional shoplifting or a single individual breaking the law. Traditional shoplifting is part of a largely spontaneous and self-serving activity, typically executed by individuals who need merchandise for personal use they simply cannot afford. Though small-scale shoplifters should not avoid prosecution, ICSC recognizes that many of these individuals need to be treated separately from those who operate as part of a larger commercial enterprise focused on making a profit through the resale of stolen goods. ORC puts a more serious strain on business owners, particularly small businesses, in multiple ways, including shopper and employee safety, reputational risk, and financial stability. ORC syndicates focus on the theft and resale of high-value branded items that are in demand from shoppers, from designer handbags to name-brand laundry detergent. When these goods are resold using an online marketplace or other means of sale, most consumers are unaware that they're purchasing stolen goods. While high-profile smash-and-grab robberies and nationwide cases involving major retailers garner the headlines this holiday season, the problem is pervasive, impacting shopping centers large and small in all regions of the country. One major enclosed mall owner reports that retail crime theft incidents of over $1,000 have nearly doubled over the past 8 years. Violent crime, including aggravated assault, battery, and armed robberies, have nearly tripled at those retail centers. And this is just what property owners know. Many retail employees have simply stopped reporting incidents to local authorities, including on-site security, because they question whether police response will be timely or effective, or because they fear retaliation from thieves and their handlers. This pattern contributes to a lack of prosecution of ORC cases and leads to difficulties in allocating public and private resources to combat ORC. Here are some pragmatic steps that Congress and law enforcement can take to address ORC. First, building on the success of state and local ORC coordination centers, Congress can pass legislation to create a federal interagency ORC task force. And as my colleagues noted, there's broad bipartisan support for CORCA, including many members of this committee. CORCA can make a meaningful impact on ORC by activating this federal coordination center while also ensuring criminal penalties address the reality of how ORC enterprises operate. Second, the federal appropriations process can also provide federal law enforcement agencies the resources and a mandate to investigate and prosecute ORC rings more effectively. Appropriators funded a similar and successful HSI initiative to combat IP theft with the creation of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. And we understand CORCA authors sought to replicate that success and use it as a model for the federal ORC Coordination Center. This coordination center is a natural next step to build on the effectiveness of HSI's Operating Boiling Point 2.0 and the accomplishments of the state and local ORC task forces. Despite the rise in e-commerce in recent years, brick and mortar stores remain the main sales channel for most goods and services purchased in the United States. However, the rise in ORC has contributed to the reasons why some retailers have chosen to close store locations, and those store closures should not be taken lightly. They result in the significant loss of jobs, diminished state and local sales tax, loss of property tax collected, and food and prescription drug deserts. On behalf of ICSE, I thank the subcommittee and my fellow witnesses for their interest and attention to this issue.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize members in order of seniority for their questions. I, at this time, recognize myself for questions. Ms. Steffen, thank you for your testimony. Do weak penalties embolden organized retail crime and organized retail criminals?
Based on my experience and the experience of my team, we believe it does. One of the facts that we rely on is we didn't even see organized retail crime or these smash and grabs, these brazen type thefts of hundreds of thousands of dollars until California passed a law that elevated the level for a felony crime to $950, and it also
And if I may, can I ask, has that had an impact on what happened in Los Angeles, the $300,000 of ransacking that happened at a Nordstrom's, the thousands of dollars that happened at a Nike store in Los Angeles?
We are the second largest county in California, so I assume that our experience and fifth largest county in the United States would have some bearing on other counties. Yeah. I mean, that law, the California law, is across every county in California, and the key problem is it didn't allow for first time or second time. There's no aggregation, and you can steal every day of the week just under $950, and it's the same
So criminals
penalty.
are coming back every day of the week, and they're stealing.
And it's still a misdemeanor.
And they're not being prosecuted.
Well, they're being prosecuted in San Diego because
Okay.
we believe, but it doesn't mean that it can be a deterrent because it's always going to be a misdemeanor. They're not going to remain in custody.
You know what's interesting, sorry to cut you off, but our previous witnesses on the government panel wouldn't talk about the thresholds, they wouldn't talk about deterrence, but what I'm hearing from y'all's testimony is that deterrence matters. I'll go to Mr. Johnston at this time. Are your member companies scared? Are their employees scared? And does that have an effect on the consumers being scared to go into retail stores because of this?
Yes, thank you for your question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is not a victimless crime. Employees, consumers, communities, we are all victims of organized retail crime. Our retailers have reported, as I alluded in my oral testimony, many of them have seen increases of 100% or more over last year, which many have also, those were all-time highs to begin with last year. Injuries, deaths, so employees are fearful. No employee should wish to go to work in fear for their job. No employee should have to quit or leave a job for fear.
Well, I agree with that. Just today, here in Northwest DC, It was reported on Wisconsin Avenue that 5 to 6 guys with guns ordered everyone in a Verizon store to the floor and robbed that store for the phones and the other technology that was in it. Mr. Glenn, I'm so sorry for the losses that Home Depot has had. That's just horrific. Are your employees at Home Depot scared for their lives when they go to work because of the rise in organized retail crime?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate the chance to answer that. What I would say is that I think we've been at the forefront of trying to protect our associates and take the appropriate steps to make them feel as if they're entering a safe environment. We start at the parking lot, we bring it inward, we train our associates, we overtrain our associates on de-escalation, to be great witnesses, to not engage with bad actors. So while there is a broader, fear out there in the environment, I think that we've done a nice job of making our associates feel good.
Mr. Johnston, I asked the previous witnesses if they see trends. Are there cities in the United States that have a higher level of organized retail crime? Ms. Stephan testified that in San Diego that they're prosecuting, but maybe not in Los Angeles County. Do you see trends across the United States, cities where it's higher levels of incidents?
We do have an annual survey that goes out to our retail members that one of the questions is where do they often see the highest levels of organized retail crime, and we do provide a top 10 list. It is based on their responses. It is based on their experiences and their internal data. But that is not to say that, along with my fellow panelists in the previous panel, organized retail crime groups, they prey on wherever and however they can obtain their goods and their dollars.
But if, as Ms. Stephan was saying, if you have a non-aggregated penalty day in and day out, $950, doesn't that add to a criminal's mindset that they're going to take advantage of that if they know they're going to only be prosecuted for a misdemeanor instead of a felony?
I would agree with that. Our retailers do see that aggregation can play a large role in deterrence, where an individual act, an organized retail crime is not a singular act. It's conducted in multiple acts, multiple perpetrators in an organized effort. So aggregation can be of great support and assistance in this matter.
Thank you. Ms. Stephan, last question. Alvin Bragg's day one policy that took armed robbery from, in some cases, from a felony to a misdemeanor, does that embolden criminal activity?
I believe that every prosecutor should follow the rule of the law, and the law says that robbery is a felony.
Thank you. I yield back and now recognize the ranking member for his line of questioning.
Well, thank you all very much again for being here, and I want to dive into some of the recommendations that you all have presented to the committee, and let's start with the coordination centers, which several of you referenced and have been piloted in different parts around the places around the country. I'll open this one up to any of you. Can any of you comment on the experience of your organizations with coordination centers? What's worked, what's not? What are the best practices that we should be mindful of as we look to expand this model across the country? So I don't know, Mr. Glenn, would you like to take a crack at it?
We have had conversation with HSI about participating with them on the coordination centers, but to this point we have not.
I believe in coordination centers based on our experience in San Diego County. We use it for every pressing issue. For example, we use it to track school threats very successfully, where we're able to know exactly whether a threat has been resolved and whether we're able to make that school safe. We use it in elder fraud, where we finally are able to track that we had $49 million stolen to elder fraud in San Diego in 1 year. So we look forward to having that same type of effort in order to gather accurate data. The best way to come up with solutions is to really know the size of the monster that you're dealing with.
And then, Mr. Glenn, one of the root causes of the rise of organized retail theft that you highlighted is the availability of easy platforms for resale, particularly online. And again, I'll open this up to any of you. What should we as Congress be thinking about when it comes to the resale aspect of this? Should there be tougher requirements for these online platforms to know their customers, to know who is selling these goods, particularly large amounts of bulk goods that are highly likely to have been procured through retail theft?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In a perfect world, long before it's being resold, we would not actually experience the loss. I think the Informed Consumers Act was a great first step, but we also know that there's some opportunities with enforcement. We also know that there's some opportunities with education, and we need to continue to kind of round out the needs and the abilities of using the Inform Act to kind of help that e-fencing resale opportunity and actually put some teeth into it from a prosecution perspective.
Does anyone else have a perspective on that?
The Inform Act is a great tool, but it needs the people with expertise in order to make the cases. In the old days, we had the pawn shops, so we put together that you need to show ID and other things. So everything went online, and really this is why COVID shutdowns made more shoppers go online, so this became extremely profitable. But we need the FTC and law enforcement to be able to have the technology, the tools to work with those platforms in order to bring accountability.
Thank you. So I think we all agree that this is an issue that's worthy of our attention in Congress and that we all want to work together to try to help you in combating organized retail theft. That's why I am proud to have signed on as a co-sponsor to Representative Titus and Representative Buck's Combating Organized Retail Theft Act, and I certainly encourage all of my colleagues to take a look at the bill and do the same. It deals with the aggregation issue and penalties in the U.S. Code, but also gives Homeland Security and DOJ some additional tools on the investigative and data sharing side that I think are very important as well. But with the last moment that I have here, people are watching, and those of you from industry who are leaders in this space have adopted some practices at your level as well to help protect your employees and your customers. So I just want to give any of you one last opportunity. If there are any best practices that you have put into place that you would like to highlight that might be useful for others who are watching to see as well.
Thank you for the question. What I would tell you is that our process and our policy at the Home Depot is to make our associates understand the risk. First and foremost, it's an education process. 2, provide them with the tools for de-escalation, really making sure that they understand how to extricate themselves from these types of scenarios. And 3, to be great witnesses. Teaching people to be great witnesses to what's happening around them can help us then close these cases down, because we actually bring all this information in together into kind of a processing database for us, and we use that information to work with law enforcement.
Thank you all. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for the work that you do. Madam District Attorney, I'm paraphrasing, but I believe when the chairman asked a question, your response was that a district attorney must do everything in their power to uphold the law, and if someone, for example, is charged with robbery, it should be a felony and thus prosecuted as such. Obviously, that question came about because of the rogue DA that we have in New York City, specifically in Manhattan. And I know Mr. Magaziner had just mentioned that when it comes to retail theft, we all are trying to work together. And I would say that many of us are trying to work together, but there are actually a member of this subcommittee who is a very big supporter of that rogue DA. Mr. Goldman is a big supporter of Mr. Bragg in Manhattan. And there is no question that we are trying to work together. But when we see cities like New York City, a city that I wore the uniform in, I was a proud NYPD detective for my entire career, those cities are suffering because of policies put in place by Democrats. That's without a question. We have in the state of New York, the governor, who was a Democrat, the state legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate, Democrat control, put into place criminal justice reform, bail reform, and at no point at any time did they have any conference with people in law enforcement who were actually on the street making sure that they were living out their oath to protect and serve. At no point did they have conversations with the men and women who wore the uniform, who were wresting illegal firearms from people's hands. Those conversations never happened. They did it because they believed that they were going to reform our criminal justice system. And I will say that as someone, again, who has spent a career in law enforcement, there are reforms needed, but they aren't reforms that need to be painted with a broad brush. So I want to thank you for saying what you said and making us all realize that when someone is elected district attorney, it doesn't give he or she the ability to rewrite, in New York's case, the penal code and get to pick and choose what crimes they prosecute. This has led in places like New York, and not just the city, but in places like my district in the southwest corner of Long Island, where you now walk into places like CVS, and when you walked in with your family and you grabbed that little basket because you didn't want to do a lot of shopping, you just wanted to do a little, so you had the basket. No more baskets. Why? Because people were taking those baskets, filling them up with whatever it is that they wanted, and walking right out the door. Why? Because of the laws that were put in place by the other side of the aisle. There was really no repercussions, and it literally took the handcuffs out of law enforcement's tool belt and put the handcuffs on prosecutors. So what I'm asking here today is, what can we do? I mean, what is it that members of Congress, what can we do to work with local law enforcement agencies besides changing the justice reform? What have you seen that has been successful in your area that we can do to curtail some of the disasters that we're seeing?
I think what you're doing here by example, coming together around smart legislation, which has bipartisan support, is a great step. But for me in San Diego, whenever I'm fighting battles, I emphasize that public safety, the safety of our children, our businesses, our communities, small and large, that is not a political issue. That's a human issue. That's a human rights issue. Nothing will thrive without safety. You take out our police, you take out our law enforcement, you take out our prosecutors, or you make them for sale to anybody, then you take out the safety. With that, there is just no going back. You cannot thrive as a neighborhood. So I always elevate the voice of the victims. There's nothing more powerful than hearing from the people affected and being on the ground, because that is just avoids all politics, and that's how I handle my region.
And you've been a district attorney for how long?
This is my second term.
Okay,
so
but
5 years.
you've obviously been a prosecutor.
33
years. And I would assume that at no point in prepping for a trial or anything like that, and at least in my career in the NYPD, one question that is never asked by those when they're responding to a 911 call is, what political party are you from?
Exactly. No police report ever shows that.
Thank you. And I had some questions, but my time has run out for Mr. Glenn from Home Depot. If we could chat after, that would be great. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. And Stefan, I just want to say I did a lot of work with the California DA's Association when I was in the state legislature. So in the few seconds that I have, few minutes, I'm going to ask you, start out with quick questions from you. First of all, your approach was, this should not be a partisan issue. This is about victims. This is about protecting our community. So first question to you is, would we be better off funding or defunding the FBI? Get rid of the FBI?
Sir, we need excellent institutions.
Like the FBI.
And in San Diego, we
Thank you very much. There have been some people in this House that have advocated for that. Second of all, I want to ask you specifically, in San Diego, you're the district attorney in San Diego. I'm very good friends with our Orange County DA, Todd Spitzer. So right now, you said in California, $970 is the threshold. Anything below that is a misdemeanor, anything above that is a felony, is that correct?
$950, yes.
$950.
Yes. And no matter how many times.
So it doesn't aggregate. So you go in every day and do 949, 949, 949. It's still a misdemeanor. Has there been any discussions with our legislators in California to change that? So maybe there's an issue of aggregation there that could be taken into consideration?
There have been discussions, but it has to go back into a proposition before the voters.
So this was a proposition passed by the California voters, not the legislature itself.
That's right, sir.
Okay. This is interesting, so let's see what we can do when it comes to that issue moving forward. Mr. Glenn, you're president of Home Depot. Yes? One of my favorite toy stores. One of my favorite toy stores.
Yes, sir.
I noticed you put in self-checkout counters now. Has that helped or hurt the situation in any way?
Thank you for the question. I don't know that there's been any data that ties self-checkout to organized retail crime. It is certainly something that we are keeping an eye on and looking at the data, but we don't see the type of crime that we're talking about are these more broad-based, aggressive rollouts of carts full of product, coming in and breaking open the locking containers and just swiping the shelves and running out the door with 10, 12 individuals. That's what we see as more the organized retail crime in our stores.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Agoda, good to see you, ma'am. I wanted to, you represent essentially shopping centers and the challenges that we have with a lot of these shopping centers, your anchor tenants, so to speak, moving out, closing down because of the losses in some cases. So question is, who are the victims here? Who suffers when you have a major shopping center losing tenants?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. ICSC represents retail facilities of all shapes and sizes in all regions of the country, from large enclosed malls to grocery-anchored centers and everything in between. And you're right, we have seen an unusual amount of store closures in geographic areas that have experienced high numbers of ORC cases. And when stores start closing due to the effects of ORC, we see loss of jobs, we see loss of state and local sales tax generated, and loss of property tax generated, and of course it's a blight on the community. A single grocery store typically creates $2.4 million in annual state and local sales tax and has an average of 133 jobs. And really, if store closings start increasing as a result of ORC, not only will sales and property tax collection decrease, schools and first responders will be the ones that suffer most. So in addition to that shopper experience being diminished, you're going to see effects on other public services as well.
So not just a loss directly to a retailer, but really to the whole community in terms of tax revenue, the ability to support local services. And like you said, in my district right now, I see it every day. Shopping centers losing major tenants, and the whole area just does not look well. And our challenge is trying to bring in retail to support that community. But I want to thank you. I'll thank all of you for being here today. And Ms. Stevens, I'd like to have a sidebar with you later on, and Mr. Glenn with you as well. Thank you, and Mr. Chair, I'm out of time.
The gentleman yields back, and this will be the last member to question. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by introducing a couple letters into the record, one from CHEP and one from Retail Industry Leaders Association.
Without objection, and so ordered.
Thank you. I want to start with Mr. Johnson. Earlier, sir, you said that your organization has a top 10 list. Can you go ahead and let us know what those are?
Thank you for the question, sir. I do not have those off the top of my head. I can provide those answers to you at a later date.
Do you happen to know any of them, sir, since you're testifying here before Congress as the representative?
Congressman, in no particular order, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, Memphis, Oakland, Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah, imagine that. Just like the last panel, similar trends that we're looking for, pattern recognition. What do those have in common, sir? I mean, I get it. You guys got to be careful, but if you want Congress to help, we got to be honest about these things. These are all Democrat-run cities. All of them have policy changes, just like Ms. Steffen was talking about. Somebody who's done this her whole life, who knows that Crime doesn't care about your political affiliation. It doesn't care about your skin color. It affects everybody. How about you, Mr. Glenn? You represent Home Depot. When these stores go under and they lock their doors and bar up their windows and they leave town, does it affect just Republicans or white people, or does it affect everybody?
No, sir, it affects everyone.
Yeah, it's pretty sad, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And it's pretty sad, but like a lot of things in this country, unfortunately, this is another self-inflicted wound. And the worst part about it is you sit here in these panels and you talk to the folks before you who are all leaders in the FBI, law enforcement, and they can't even tell you what the trends are. It's no wonder we can't solve these problems, because we can't even have serious conversations anymore. Ms. Steffen, did I say that right, ma'am? You said we didn't even see the smash and grab type events until the law changes. Ma'am, when you see these type of retail crimes increase, do you also see other crimes, other violent crimes like murder, robbery, etc.? Do you see those increase as well?
You know, San Diego is one of the safest urban counties in America, so we work very hard on solving crime, murders. We have about 100 murders a year, which is one too many for me, but extremely low for the 5th largest county in the United States. So we see trends, but we work together in task forces to shut them down and to make sure that our community is safe. We just don't leave anything to chance. So as we saw these trends in organized retail crime, we brought together the task forces. We worked on solving them with retailers coming together, putting the images from their videos in one room, coming together to solve this issue, coordinating. And this is why I was excited about testifying, hoping that other regions will follow the example that we are setting, that my team, I'm proud of, is setting.
Yes. Well, I'm not surprised at all, ma'am, that your city has a track record that it does. I actually spent a lot of time in San Diego. I was stationed there for about a decade. And I did, for the most part, depending on what neighborhood I was in, did feel relatively safe. So thank you, ma'am, for what you do. And I hope that there are other folks in law enforcement and DA's offices all over the country that are watching this and can learn from your example. Because one thing I can tell you is you don't seem too interested in partisan politics. You seem interested in justice, protecting the people that elected you, appointed you, want you to protect them, and I appreciate you for doing that. I can't say that about every DA, every prosecutor in the country, and I think it's despicable. I think it's absolutely despicable, just like I questioned the panel before you, that we have individuals that are pumping millions and millions and millions of dollars into prosecutor races and DA races all over the country to try and weaken law enforcement in those areas. That's despicable, it's disgusting, and Americans all over the country of all creeds, ethnicities, races, religions are paying for it. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses on both panels today for the valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.